Thanks for tuning in. We're going to be looking at another passage from the book of John. We're going to be in chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. And the book of John says, "As he passed by," that's Jesus, "he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' And Jesus answered, 'It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming, when no things can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.' Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, 'Go wash in the pool of Siloam,' which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, 'Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?' Some said, 'It is he.' Others said, 'No, but it is like him.' He kept saying, 'I am the man.' So they said to him, 'Then how were your eyes open?' And he answered, 'The man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, "Go to Siloam and wash." So I went and washed and received my sight.' They said to him, 'Where is he?' And he said, 'I do not know.'" Now I was tempted to skip over these first couple of verses and come back to them at the end of this episode, because the truth that they hold is a truth that will shape your view of God forever. However, let's just go right from the first verses and walk our way through, and hopefully you will see what I mean. This is not a complicated situation. Jesus sees a man who is blind from birth. The significance of being told that he was blind from birth is that this is not something that recently happened to a person where we could say if they received their sight back, oh, it was just a matter of time before their eyes healed from whatever affliction it was. No, this man has been a man who has been blind all his life, and all of the community around him would have been familiar with his situation. When some kind of an affliction happened to a person, it was common for people to assume that that person was being punished by God for some sin that they had committed. From their point of view, if it wasn't the blind man who sinned, then it must have been his parents. I was raised in a household that had this kind of mentality. When my mom really got frustrated with my behavior, or that of my brothers as well, she would point her finger at us and assure me that God was going to get me for what I had done. I don't think I'm alone in that kind of experience, and as a result, I grew up thinking just like the disciples. When you see something bad happen to a person, you think God is punishing them. And when something bad happens to you, you think God is after you. I think the disciples, as well as anyone else in that time period in Jewish history, should have known that this was a false view of affliction. The book of Job had been written about 2,000 years before, and the lessons in the book of Job are important to us. Job was an incredibly wealthy man, and he was also an incredibly godly man. He had a deep relationship with God and obeyed God as much as anyone. Then one day, his life was turned completely upside down. All of his family were killed by raiders or natural disasters, and all of the possessions were destroyed or stolen. It was an incredibly trying time for Job, and as he thought about God and his suffering, there were three choices before him. First, he could simply believe that God had nothing to do with the suffering. Second, he could believe that God was involved in his suffering and hate him for it. And third, he could believe that God was involved in his suffering and still trust God as he had previous to this calamity. We read the book of Job. His initial response after this happened was this. It says, "Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped." Let me read that again. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Job also had 3 friends that came to him at different times, all assuming that the great tragedy that Job had endured was the result of some great sin that he had committed. But it wasn't so. As we go through the story, we hear Job pour out his heart, trying to grasp why. Why has this happened to him? And at the end of the book, God appears to Job and essentially reminds Job, and us by extension, that God's ways and thoughts are so much higher than ours. When Job hears God speak at the end of that book, the book of Job, and he hears what he says, Job says this, I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once and will not answer, twice, but I will proceed no further. In other words, I'm going to shut up. A little bit later, Job says to God, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand. I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. And by the way, Job never did get an answer from God as to why he suffered the way he did. Why? Because he is God and we are not. The book of Job teaches us many things that are incredibly important to our worldview, how we think about the world we live in, our place in it, and of course, God. I'm going to give you 4 things. 1, bad things do happen to good people. Remember, we're living in a fallen, sin-cursed world, and this world is never going to be all fun and games. 2, God is intimately connected to everything that happens here on the planet, including suffering. From the very first book of the Bible to the last, God is always and everywhere involved with everyone and everything in his creation. 3, if God were not intimately involved in everything that happens, then he's not all-powerful or all-knowing. And he certainly isn't the sovereign God that I need him to be in control of this world. And that's not a God that any of us can trust to keep all of the promises that he's made in the Bible. 4, Job knew that God was sovereignly in control over all things and all events, that afflictions come sometimes as a result of sin, but also afflictions come for other reasons, and that it was in God's wise and good hands to decide the where, when, and who as he worked out his perfect purposes. And that takes us back to Jesus. The question he was asked was, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. All this time, all these years that had passed, people viewed this blind man and his parents as sinners, people that had done bad things that justified God making this man blind, punishing this man. But this blindness had nothing to do with sin. Jesus is saying that it was in the plan of God that one day the works of God might be displayed in him. And this was that day. Jesus had just done the work of God And that miracle was serving to validate the message of Jesus, who he is, and that what he says is true. The rest of the passage is less weighty. Jesus uses mud in the process of healing the man and restoring his sight, but I don't think we should read too much into that. Sometimes God doesn't use anything to do a miraculous work, and at other times he uses means to do a miracle, just like he did in this case. Some people speculate reasons for the use of the mud, but I think it's just that, pure speculation, so we're not going to go there. So let's wrap it up. We need to understand that there is only one true God, and that God is sovereignly in control of everything that happens in the universe. Sometimes he is the cause of something that happens, and at other times he permits something to happen that he could have chosen to stop. Many people don't like this idea that God chooses to allow bad things to happen to people that we think of as good people. We would all prefer a God who runs the universe the way we would like him to run it. That would be a God who stops all evil and all sinning and prevents anything bad happening to nice people. But he is God, and we are not. And he has a perfect plan and purposes on which he does not consult with us little human beings. Elsewhere in the Bible, and particularly in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 28, if you want to look it up, we learn that God works all of these things out for the good of the people who love him. For that, we will have to trust Jesus. Thanks for listening. See you next time.